Hey guys, it's me, Tiffany. So I wanted to do something fun for my next few reads, and I decided I'm going to let this random generator pick my next 4 books that I will read for this vlog. The thing about these 10 books that I picked is they're all on my priority list on TBRs. So they are books that I need to get to anyways to get my own personal goal on that. And I have not read a single one of these books, so they'll all be brand new to me. So that's going to be fun. Also, as I said, it will pick out 4 books that I will read, but since I only own one of these books, I might read them in whatever order I want of the 4 that it picks, just because I'm not going to buy them. I've checked. They're all available at my library, so just depending on when things come in, or even if they all come in at once, I'll go by whatever mood I'm in. It'll just be these 4 books. Okay, so the books that I picked are The Secret Garden, The Autobiography of an Ex-Colored Man, The 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse, Home by Toni Morrison, American Panda, Closer to Nowhere, Little Women, Star Daughter, The Last Train to Key West, and The Lakota Way. The Closer to Nowhere book is the only one that I own, so let's see what we get. Alright, so I got The Secret Garden, Little Women, The Lakota Way, and The Autobiography of an Ex-Colored Man. So, we did not get the book that I own, so I'm going to have to check all these out. And I think it's interesting that I got 2 very popular, classics that is, if you're a big classic reader, you probably read those, so that's going to be interesting. So I will get back to you when I get these books and I start reading the first one. Hey y'all, so I decided with the 4 books, I'm going to do The Secret Garden first, mostly because that was the only one that was available for instant pickup at my library. So that one was chosen for me. The next one, I haven't decided if it's going to be The Lakota Way or The Autobiography of an Ex-Colored Man. Then it's going to be Little Women. Then whichever one I didn't pick will be the 4th. I just didn't want to do Secret Garden and Little Women back to back, so I'm staggering like that. The other 3 are in transit or getting ready for pickup, so I'm just going to pick them up together and I'll decide when I'm done with The Secret Garden. So I've read the first 10 chapters of this and everybody's just a bunch of turds. Like, this was written in, let's see, when was this written? This says 2008, and that is wrong. So that must be the Penguin edition, the year of this Penguin edition that's out. Okay, so it's 1911. I'm gonna say it is not 2008. So it starts off with kids bullying Mary Lennox, which is the main girl. The adults are rude about her, like, at least in this, like, not completely to her face. Honestly, Mary's a turd too. Like, she's entitled, she's privileged, she's bratty, and she wasn't really taught any better. She was living in India, and instead of being raised by her parents, they had their servants, like, raise her, let her do whatever she wanted. Like, she didn't even dress herself until she got to England. So yeah, that's the kind of level of privilege she had. But you know, the environment's really different between that and Yorkshire, and her parents die. And apparently her mom was beautiful, and a bunch of adults keep talking about how beautiful she was, which kind of annoyed me, and then complain that Mary didn't get any of her elegance and yada yada yada. First off, she's a kid. She's not going to be perfectly mature, even if she was raised differently. And then second off, her parents had so little to do with Mary that apparently some people didn't even realize they had a daughter. So she was neglected a lot, and kids bullied her. So her life changed hard. And I want to say this was in the very first few chapters. This was written in 1911. At the time this was written and the story takes place, the British Empire was over India, and they didn't get kicked out until 1947, and slavery was a thing. At this time, they used the word servants for historical context because technically slavery was illegal. So they had like civic service or something like that. I can't fully remember the exact term, but they called them servants instead, but they were still treated like crap. They were slaves, like straight up they were slaves. They just used a different term for it so they could get past the law. Like Mary even talked about how she used to hit one of her servants and things like that. The way they are talked about is extremely racist and extremely in your face. And I just wanted to give historical context of it. Hard to read, to be honest. Like when I got to like those chapters and those monologues about how even Mary as a child just talking so much hatred towards people, it made me sick to my stomach. Like it was much. And I know this was a different time and stuff, but it was like, it punched you in the face, really, especially when it comes from a child, you know? And that's how she was raised. Well, up until like the 10th chapter, she finally finds the key, tries to find the secret door. She hadn't found it yet. And she's starting to calm down a bit. She learns how to jump rope, and she starts making a little friend, and she's starting to calm down a bit. She realizes that maybe she does have to dress herself, and maybe she does have to ask permission to do things. It's not the same. So, okay, so I am like another third of the way through on this, and I like that Mary has calmed down. I think I mentioned that in the last update yesterday, but in this you can really see her using gardening as a therapeutic type thing, and she's not consciously doing it, but watching her garden and even her friend garden with her, it's nice to see how much it seems to calm her, and she has, you know, gotten peace from it. She's chilled out a bit. She's actually making friends. And I like that at one point she says she went from liking nobody to about 5 people. And that's definitely some growth, you know, and she's only like 9 or 10 or something. She's somewhere around that range. And I mean, people do suck, but it's nice to see there's a little less dislike or hate in this little girl, and she's actually growing to be, you know, more respectful, nicer, willing to give people a chance. She's still a bit of a brat, but you know, she's a kid. Most kids are brats. Even the nicest kids seem to have like a little bit of brat tendencies occasionally, but you can't go from being like a full brat to absolutely perfect within a couple of weeks or ever how long this is. So there is a section I wanted to read. So her uncle who's taking care of her comes back, right? And I'm not going to read the whole paragraph, but he does ask, "Do you want toys, doll?" "Might I," quavered Mary, "might I have a bit of earth?" And then he says, "Earth? What do you mean?" She says, "To plant seeds in, to make things grow, to see them come alive." And he glazes over her. "Do you care about gardens so much?" She replies back, "I didn't know about them in India. I was always ill, tired, and it was hot. Sometimes I made little beds in the sand and stuck flowers in them, but here it's so different." Then he says, "A bit of earth," he says to himself, and Mary thought somehow she must have reminded him of something. "You can have as much earth as you want. You remind me of someone else who loved the earth and watched things grow. When you see a bit of earth you want, with something like, 'Smile, take it, child, make it come alive.' May I take it from anywhere if it's not wanted?" "Anywhere," he answered. So, you know, she hasn't had a lot of contact with him. And when, you know, she first got there, everything seemed to be very strict, very by the rules. And I really like that. Like, that was like really nice to, you know, see. Okay, so I finished this, and I'm just gonna give quick thoughts on what I have to say before I start the next book on another day. So I read this in 2 days. This is a very simple read, and it's also a really height-wise short book. So I'm sure the amount of pages is just because of the height. But I mean, it's only 300 pages, and it's written very simply and straightforward, which is, I guess, good for a kid's book. But sometimes in these older books, I've noticed even The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which has been a couple of years since I've read that, but sometimes they use almost too much dated language, like slang, not words that they actually used commonly, but just slight slang that younger people or whatever use. And this doesn't feel as dated as The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, even though this is older. So I'll give it that. This is outside of the comments basically about the British colonial system. This doesn't feel that dated, and the writing doesn't feel hardly dated at all. It's cute. It's a kind of a coming to age thing. The kids do say, a little bratty towards the end, but it's what you expect it kind of bratty from a child, not just overwhelmingly horrendously bratty. It's a natural level with kids. And I don't mind that. I don't mind kids feeling like real kids. And I do appreciate that. I'm not much of a kid person, but I like realistic characters. And I'm glad she calmed down a lot. It is nice. And there was an ending in this, and part of the ending in this book talking about things sometimes just pop up in your head. And I mentioned this earlier today when I was reading halfway through, and I'm sometimes that does happen, but I'm unsure if that's a good message to promote. Hypochondriacs are a thing, but there is a reason for it. I'm not an expert, so I'm not going to pretend to be, but there's phobias usually, and stress could cause that. And I just think it's weird how these parents are never involved in these kids' life, which it seems to be that with children's cartoons and stuff. So I mean, maybe that's where that trope has come from, is these kids' classics, or maybe rich parents in England were like this. I'm not sure. I don't have a lot of context on I like history, but I don't really look up too much about children's lives in certain time periods. I look more at events. But I have to say, maybe this isn't something for everybody, but I do think it is simple enough to read, especially if you have this historical context, that most people should be able to get this. But there is a bit of ableism, racism in this, so try to keep that in mind. I could definitely see how this could be a kid's classic, especially if it was adapted into a cartoon and I mean, it's simple to read. It holds up. The themes are nice, about growth and giving people a chance. That's something a lot of us have to learn. And I am done with this. So I shall wait a couple of days till my library gets the other book, and I will come back. Hey guys, so I'm about halfway through the Autobiography of an Ex-Colored Man. This is not a long book, but just being halfway through it, there is a lot to unpack. So it starts off with him being young, and it's during the Great Migration, where a lot of Black people leave the South and go up north, especially during Jim Crow. And apparently he is mixed, and he is extremely light-skinned, so he passes as white very oftenly. And he didn't realize that he was even mixed or anything. From what his mom is described as, she's very light-skinned as well, because there was an event in school that basically they did the one drop rule thing. If they know you have any black in you, you're basically black, and that caused an event. So he went home and talked to his mother, and while he didn't find out who his father was, he was basically told how he is mixed and things of that nature. And he does a lot of his outlets and stuff through music He is very educated, and the writing in this is really, really pretty. Like, I'm going to read a passage to you, and I just really love how James Weldon Johnson writes. She of brown eyes unpacked her violin, and we went through the duet several times. I was soon lost to all the other thoughts and delights of music and love. I saw delights of love without reservation, for at no time in life is love so pure, so delicious, so poetic, so romantic as it is in boyhood. A great deal has been said about the heart of a girl when she stands where the brook and river meet. But what she feels is negative. More interesting is the heart of a boy when, just at the budding dawn of manhood, he stands looking wide-eyed into long vistas opening before him, when he becomes conscious of awakening and quickening strangeness of desire and unknown powers. When he sees and feels is shadowy and mystical enough to be intangible, and so more beautiful when his imagination is unsouled and his faith new and whole, then it is love wears a halo. The man who has not loved before was 14 as he missed a foretaste of Epsilon. There's a lot of that type of writing in this, and I'm just like, man, this man knows how to write. And the story is definitely interesting so far. And just the way he navigates through his identity and how he feels about passing and the Black community, and then just society in general. He also talks about Cubans and white people. So I'm definitely going to read more of this quickly. I didn't even want to stop to film this. I was like, should I just do a review in this vlog instead of stopping reading this, because I am enjoying it. So I'll see you later. Hey guys, so I did finish this yesterday, not long after I recorded the first video, but I just felt like crap all day yesterday. I don't really feel like good today, but yesterday I just felt so bad. So after I finished this, I just laid in bed, watched anime, and ate mashed potatoes. And I do not regret my decision. Today, still feel like crap, but I do feel better. So let's talk about this. So he ends up going to Paris. He also goes to London, but he likes Paris better. He even has a little part where he compares the two, but I'm just going to talk about Paris since he claims that's his favorite place on earth. He goes there to play music for this rich guy that he forms a very strong relationship with. He compares this relationship being even stronger than his mother. And at one point the conversation comes up, should he go back to the US or should he stay in Paris, especially with the way America was treating African Americans. So he does go back to the US, he meets some Texans, and he calls them out because the Texans thinks he's white and decides to say some foolish stuff to him. And he does call them out in the guise of being white. Then he also sees an African American man being burned to death, screaming. There was a crowd. This was written at the height of lynching in the US for African Americans. And after that, he decides he's gonna just stay appearing as white. He ends up marrying a white woman and having kids. The white woman knew of his mixed heritage and she accepted him anyways. And she dies after her second child in childbirth, and he raises his kids as being white. He has a tough conversation with himself in this book about he loves his kids and he wants to give them every advantage that he possibly can get them. That's what most parents want. But he goes into detail about this, and he thinks that if nobody knows about their mixed heritage, they'll get the biggest amount of advantage. But he felt like he had to choose between that and his love of music, especially since he loves African American music so much. But he chose the path he chose. But it goes into a very deep and important, sorry, my cat, deep conversation about You know, he had to choose one or the other. And it doesn't necessarily say that he full on regrets it, but he regrets it at the same time, because he don't regret giving his children advantages, but he regrets feeling like he had to give up his dream for, you know, safety, honestly. So I definitely recommend this book. I found it because I saw a couple of other books going on Goodreads about like black and white mixed children, or even just light-skinned African Americans that was passing as white and going through society. And apparently this was the first fictional autobiography by a African American that was published. This isn't his personal memoir, it is a fictional memoir, but he apparently published this anonymously to kind of give it more of that mysterious, who could this have been, because like his name's not even mentioned in this text. So the fictional guy don't even have a name here. And I think that's like a very intriguing way to go about writing something like this. And I definitely enjoy it. It is a good read. He is a fabulous author. Like I said in the last video, there are just so many beautiful passages. There's a lot of deep conversations. And I really think you should pick this up. So, the next book I'm going to read is Little Women. I didn't know Little Women was chunky, because I wasn't sure what order I was going to read these 4 books in, but then I decided the hard classic, which was Secret Garden. Sorry, I don't feel good. Secret Garden. Then I read this. Then I was going to read Little Women. Then I was going to read The Lakota Way. Then when I saw the size of the book, I was like, should I read The Lakota Way and then read this, because this is such a chunky book? But then I did some research on it, because I remember seeing like Little Men before, like an actual book called Little Men. So I was like, is this big too? Like, you know, I was like looking into the series, and I thought I heard the term good wife before in like Joe's Boys, which I was right. Goodreads show that. And I did research. So apparently this copy of Little Women's actually 2 books. It is Little Women and Good Wives, and it's like Little Women, Good Wives, Little Men, and Joe's Boys, I believe. The last 2 might be mixed. But apparently a lot of editions of Little Women, they have the first 2 books in one thing, so this is a big boy. It is like 800 pages, and apparently if you get an edition of Little Women that has 47 chapters, you've got the edition that has the 2 books in it. The first book's only 23 chapters, so depending on how many chapters you have, depends on which edition. This is beautiful. This is the library's, but this is a beautiful cover. So I've decided I'm just going to go with my original plan. I'm going to read this. I'm only going to guarantee the first 23 chapters, since it is technically 2 books. I want to finish the whole thing, I do. But since I've never read this before, I haven't seen any of the movies. I've seen stills because I love Emma Watson, but I haven't watched the movie yet because I want to wait till it's cheap to rent or on a streaming service. Like I do rent movies like on Amazon, but I wait till they're like $4, you know? So I don't, like, when it first came out, they wanted like $19.99 to rent it for like the first 2 weeks, and I was like, no. At that point, I'd rather just own the movie. And, you know, I think it's been like 2 years now, so it's probably cheap. I haven't checked. I kind of forgot about it. But I'm only going to guarantee the first 23. But if it's good, I'll read the whole thing. If it's good, I'll read the whole thing. But if I'm not enjoying myself, I'm not going to read all 800 pages. But if I do enjoy myself, I will. So that won't be a problem. And I'm excited to get into this because there is a retelling I want to read. And I wanted to read this first. This is actually in like the 21 books that I want to read in 2021. And I technically mentioned the other book, but I did say I need to read this first because I feel like that other book could definitely be great on its own, But I want to pick up those little bitty details, you know? Like, it's fun when you've read the original source and you can pick out all the details in the retellings. So I started Little Women. I'm on chapter 9. And the first 3 or 4 chapters were endearing, but they were really corny. It starts off at Christmas and they're talking about gifts and stuff. And I get it's supposed to be endearing, and it is. It's just, you know. But as far as the vocabulary goes, because I know sometimes with classics, the vocab and what have you might be, like, the terminology might feel really dated or might be harder. Sometimes they're straightforward, sometimes they're not. And this was written in the 1800s or whatever. And the language is pretty simple. There's only like one word I think I was like, huh? And it wasn't that I didn't know what it meant. It's just like the word queer meant something really different in this and back then than it does now. And I knew that. It's just sometimes, you know, you don't think of it that way. And so yeah, the first 3 or 4 chapters were really corny, but it got better, definitely, because I made it to chapter 9. And there was some interesting stuff about this. Like, this might be kind of a little bit out of order because I'm doing this like mostly like unscripted, unless there was something like a page I want to read a passage off of. But I think it's interesting that it was Amy, I think, that brought limes to school for everybody, and she got in a lot of trouble for it. Like, he smacked her hands and then made her stand up during PE, and then her mom takes her out of school. And I'm thinking that was saying something against corporal punishment, because that was a thing in schools for a long time. I know, like, now, like, teachers don't touch kids for the most part, but even when I was, like, in elementary school, sometimes teachers or principals would spank kids. They wouldn't do it, like, openly in the classroom like they do on some older TV shows and stuff. But, you know, that was definitely a thing, and even if you weren't supposed to bring limes to school, I do think that was a bit overkill. So I think that was commentary towards that. I think it's interesting that Meg and Joe have a type of job to make money. The dad is gone. He is helping out with the Union side of the Civil War. And they're having some property issues. And they always want to play when I'm doing something. But anyways, that threw me off. And one thing that annoyed me about Amy is she burned Joe's writing that Joe worked on for years, because she didn't get to go to a play with them. And I get that she's younger, but that seems like so extreme. But I didn't, you know, I'm just like, do little kids really do that? I know, like, sometimes siblings are like straight up like jerks, but that hasn't been my experience. I was like, do they just like burn random papers? Like, but, you know, she was wondering why Joe didn't really want to talk to her, and it's like, well, you burned her life work. They didn't have computers back then, so it was like gone. And I think I've read somewhere, because I didn't do a whole lot of research before reading this, but I have read like random articles and, like, you know, stuff about classics and stuff. And I think Joe is the author insert into the story, and that's kind of like why she's like the author and stuff. I might be wrong, but I think I've read that in like one of those articles. It's like 10 times an author has insert herself or something of that nature. So yeah, I am going to read a little more, and I am enjoying this so far. Okay, so before I keep going, I wrote something down. As I mentioned, I mostly just write down little bit of notes, like page numbers, when I want to read passages. And there was something I wanted to read in chapter 9, and I just didn't do it last time. So before I get into like continuing the thoughts, for some reason in this vlog, I'm just wanting to read passages, even though I'm not that great at reading out loud. So here we go. For context, this is Mrs. March, which is the 4 girls' mother. And I love this passage because for the time this is written, this is very progressive, and it's really not it's not really age bad. Like, not everything's about getting a husband. During the Civil War, this is like really progressive. So here we go. I want my daughters to be beautiful, accomplished, and good, to be admired, loved, and respected, to have a happy youth, to be well and wisely married, and to lead useful, pleasant lives, with little care and sorrow to how them as God sees fit to send. To be loved and chosen by a good man is the best and sweetest thing which can happen to a woman. And I sincerely hope my girls may know this beautiful experience. It is natural to think of it. Meg. Right to hope and wait for it, and wise to prepare for it, so that when the happy time comes, you may feel ready for the duties and worthy of the joy. My dear girls, I am ambitious for you, but not to have you to make a dash in the world, marry rich men merely because they are rich, or have splendid houses, which are not homes because love is wanting. Baby, no. Sorry. It was wanting. Money is needful and a precious thing, and when used well, a noble thing. But I never want you to think it is the first or only prize to strive for. I'd rather see you poor men's wives, if you are happy, be loved, content, than queens on a throne without self-respect and peace. Like, modernly, like, we don't need husbands like that. But back then, women didn't have many rights. If they did work, they barely got paid and stuff. So, like, that was definitely a concern. But for this time, that was really progressive. And I like that. Like, it definitely shows how much the mother truly cares about her girls. And I know a lot of this has a lot of Christian stuff in it. And, like Christian influence. But for the most part, outside of just like a couple of words here and there, it's not in your face. Like, so far, no Bible verses have been thrown. Like, it's not annoying, and I appreciate that so much. Like, they're Christians, but it's not, I don't feel like it's shoved down your throat as much, which back then, that's kind of a strange thing too. Like, everything was a sin. Maybe not as bad as Pilgrims, but So once I hit about chapter 10, like, I wanted to clean and do some stuff around the house, so I looked for an audiobook for this, which my library had, but I went and looked on Audible because they had Audible Plus, and they did have a full cast narration, and I did download it, but then I noticed it was really, really short, so I was like, is this just the first book or whatever? And it turns out it is an abridged, and it cuts out a lot because the reviews was like, don't read this if you want the full story. So I spent a credit for a different full cast that was recommended because I went on Reddit to look up full cast books of classics, and yeah, so I will definitely link that down, the one I used. The other one's probably good, and if you have Audible, it's free, but I don't really want to jump from an unabridged to an abridged or whatever. I don't usually like abridged for me personally. I've accidentally read 2 abridged books, and that just kind of put me off on the idea. But, with how thick this is, maybe, somebody might like that. I'll link both. So they started a club with their neighbors about the Pickwick Papers by Charles Dickens. That's where like the idea came from. I haven't read that, but I have heard of it, and I've heard people talk about it. And I thought the concept was interesting about basically putting Mel in like a bird box type thing. Like, I thought that was interesting. So Joe has 2 stories delivered to the newspaper, and they actually print one out, so that's like really cool. She finds out Mr. Brooks is holding on to one of Meg's gloves, and she's really disgusted by that. Whatever. But I still think it's cool that she got a story published, so she's actually becoming a more accomplished writer. So I'm assuming that's going to be a theme for Joe in this book. Especially, like, I don't know anything about Louise May Alcott, but I'm pretty sure she was the author inserted in this. A thing happened. So Beth went to go see a baby. It's of the family they've kind of helped. Like during Christmas time, they gave a meal to them, what have you, and they hadn't seen them in a while. And their baby gets scarlet fever, which I think is still around, just not as common as it used to be, because I think I've seen news articles about there was a scarlet fever outbreak a couple of years ago, but it's not deadly like it was back then. Like even back then, just getting the flu or a cold could honestly kill you. And Beth actually held the baby while it died. And as traumatic as that is, Beth catches scarlet fever, and the doctor goes back and forth about whether Beth is going to get better or not. So I'm sure that drives the sisters crazy. But they don't tell their mom until later, because the mom was gone because the father got injured. So she had to leave and go get her husband. Well, not go get her husband, but go see her husband. And they just didn't want her to panic. But I couldn't imagine holding like a baby in your arms till it died. And I mean, I know it's not her baby, but wouldn't the parents feel kind of weird about somebody else holding their kid while it died? I don't know. That whole situation is just heartbreaking. Like, I guess they didn't know it was about to die. I can't remember if the baby was a boy or a girl, but like, yeah, like, that's like stressful. That is like really stressful. I feel like I've read all of this in one go. I haven't, but I've read this on and off all day. Like the first part I've technically read yesterday. I just didn't feel like filming yesterday because I did feel under the weather for a couple of days, and I was just like, I'll film this tomorrow before I start reading, because I don't want to get too far ahead and then like I think about stuff and be like, oh, this has to be foreshadowing for X, Y, and Z, you know, or combine it all together, because I thought I ended in a good spot. And so technically it's been 2 days, but I finished the first book, or part one, depending, because I do have the one with 47 chapters, so it has the first 2 books in it. And as I said in the thing before I started reading this, I was only going to commit to the first 23 because that was the first book. And if I enjoyed it, I'll continue. I'm going to continue. The first book, I think, takes place in a year, and that's a lot of stuff to happen within a year. It's basically a slice of life with a lot of weird stuff going on, like get in trouble for like limes and Beth getting sick and the father leaving. But it opens up on Christmas and it ends on Christmas. And I think that's kind of a cute, you know, circle, and the dad comes home. The beginning and the ending of book 1 is very corny. I've mentioned this, but it's endearing, so whatever. It feels weird having the dad back because I like just seeing the women, you know? But is this my favorite classic so far? No, not really. But it's written very straightforward, very easy to read. Like, I don't mind stuff with harder vocabulary, and I do read that occasionally. But sometimes it's just nice having something not so complicated, to be honest. Like, sometimes you just want to relax and you don't want to have to overanalyze and overthink. And this gives you that, and this kind of gives me like a Seventh Heavens family sitcom vibes that maybe is not like a masterpiece, but you keep watching anyways, except for it's in a book. And yeah, that's how I feel on this. I was trying to wonder if I want to keep going, but I want to finish this anime I've been watching, and I don't want to sit around and just listen to an audiobook at the moment, because I've gone to the point where outside of like the first 9 chapters, it's been like almost exclusively audiobook because it's a full cast, and I just kind of enjoy that better. So I'll start book 2 probably tomorrow. But yeah, book 1, so far so good. And if you're worried about classics having a harder language and they're not modern classics, this may be a good spot to start off at least part 1 of the book, you know? Or book 1, whatever. So yeah, I will see you when I've read more, I guess. Okay, so I read more of this. I'm not going to be able to read as much today as I have read in the past few days, especially yesterday in particular. And I've read like 6 or 7 chapters. Book 2, part 2, depending on your edition, is about 3 years after the first book. It has more sitcom-y vibes, just a little older because Meg is married. She has her twins named like Demi and Daisy. And it has like the sitcom like episode, like, oh, she's used to having more money, so she spends too much money trying to fit in, you know, even though they don't have the money. And then he's like, you can't do that. And she's like, oh, okay, let me return it. Then all is well with our little twins, you know. It's just, you know, sitcom-y feels, and that's not a bad thing, and that's not a critique. It's just, if that's your vibe, you may enjoy this. You may enjoy this a lot because it's a big girl, and you'll get a lot of it versus just, you know, like 100, 200 pages, you know. You get like 3 or 4 seasons in this one book, you know, if you want to compare. And Jo swaps from writing romances to thrillers, and I think that's interesting, and apparently she's making bank at it because even though she did have to change some stuff to fit whatever the thing she was selling it to wanted, she sold it for $300. And so I got curious because the Civil War is over, and it doesn't give you an exact date, but I placed it in this conversion calculator for 2 years after the Civil War, because I figured if you know, if inflation happens, it's not going to be enough to matter since we don't have the exact year. But I wrote it down. I did the calculator, but apparently, according to this inflation app, 1868 was the year I put in, and then converted it to 2021. $300 has become $5,595 for one story. And I mean, I know there are bigger book deals and stuff, but this is also a short story. This is what they're paying a woman back then. It's very, especially for serial short stories. And that's good. She's making her money. She is making her money, and we are happy to see that. We are happy to see that. And there's nothing wrong with romances and stuff, but I think it's cool that she's making money something that's not like stereotypically woman-centered as much, you know, because this is before Agatha Christie, which I've never read any of her books, but she's like the queen of mystery and all that crap, and you know, this is before then, so we're happy to see it. Okay, so we're back here in my floor and gonna talk about the ending of Little Women or Good Wives, depending on the edition that you read. As I've mentioned every time, this has both into one, but hey, if you're joining me, you might be reading them separate. So I'm actually surprised how fast I read this, depending on this. I've talked about the size. She's thick. And I thought Amy meeting Fred, I'm just going to jump into it. Amy meeting Fred was interesting because like her and Jo are both artistic, but I think Jo cares more about accomplishing stuff in the way she wants to be artistic more than being comfortable and being like slightly artistic sprinkled through her life. But Amy meets Fred and it's like, oh, he's nice and he's rich. You know, if you want to get married to me, I'm going to say yes. And I kind of thought that was funny. And I think it's interesting that Amy basically sees her mom as the ideal virtuous woman, and that influences her path of basically getting married and what have you, which their mother is an interesting figure, like Mrs. March. She definitely cares about her daughters, and she's not just trying to be what society tells her, but, you know, she still has some of those ideals. But, you know, when she mentioned within the first book very early on about she'd rather her daughters marry poor men that treat them well than be miserable with rich men, you know, like, she definitely has her heart in the right place. I definitely have to say that. And Jo meeting the professor, like, you know, I thought that was interesting. And I thought the umbrella scene, I haven't seen the movie, I haven't read this book, but I think I've heard or seen something with drawings with this in an umbrella scene, and now I get it. I didn't think it was going to be at the very end of the book, and I kind of forgot about it until I read it. Well, I listened to it because it's audio, but when I listened to it, I was like, hey, this kind of sounds familiar. And now that I'm actually thinking about it, I think I've seen this either portrayed as something or talked about at some point. I didn't know basically anything except for this was during the Civil War and there was 4 girls. I didn't even know what market this went to really. Like, the first book's definitely for younger readers, and then the second book isn't for, I don't think necessarily as young, but it's not like adult in the way we think of adult. You know, like if they read Good Wives, I don't think it would be like a bad thing. But I do think that, I say this and I'm going right back to Joe and the Professor, I do think that is a better match than Lori. And I don't really like that Lori kind of went towards Amy because it didn't work out with Joe. Like, that's kind of skeevy to me. And I know like things were different kind of back then, and some people don't see a big deal, but I'm just like, like, if somebody told me it didn't work out with my sister, so they came my path, I'd be like, no, I do not want to be second place. But that's just me. And, you know, I'm living in 2021, you know, so my mindset's definitely different. And I don't know this man in real life, but I just know if somebody was just like, yeah, your sister's better, but since she don't want me, you want to come here? No, I'll find somebody else. Beth died, and I didn't like that Beth asked Joe to basically give up who she was and become Beth after she died. Like, I know Beth was the peacemaker and all, but all 4 of you girls are different. Yes, try to keep peace when possible, but, you know, yes, you don't have to do your job. Like, there's only one of you. And she agreed to this, but she still goes and still writes, and, you know, she gets married on her own. And Joe does have a couple of kids, kind of full circle, you know. I actually expected every sister to like have a bunch of kids and stuff. I didn't know about Beth's death. Somehow I didn't. I feel like this is probably something well known if you read classics, but I didn't know this. But I was kind of expecting all 4 of them to eventually get married and have kids, just because that's the way the world worked back then, you know? Like, when this was written, that is how it worked. But overall, I think it's a endearing books. And as I said earlier, this is very sitcom-y. Like, I really think if you like wholesome sitcoms and not like, you know, just wholesome sitcoms, you might like this, you know. And the language is very simple and straightforward, and I appreciate that so much. I go grab the Lakota Way. So I want to talk about this before I start. I didn't realize when I put it on the list that I have actually read one of Joseph M. Marshall's The Third books before. After I picked up the book, because I just didn't look at the author's name, or if I did, I had it on a list of whatever. I've read The Battle of Little Bighorn, and I read that for a class I had in college, but so apparently I have read this author before. I haven't read this. And with says the Lakota Way Stories and Lessons for Living, I went ahead and peeked through it. I haven't fully read it, but this is divided into stories and lessons. There's 12. Like I said, I haven't started it yet. I want to start it tomorrow, but I'm trying to think about this. Since this is like, normally with short stories, I don't do this with poems, but normally with short stories, I read like 1 a day, and that's how like I appreciate each story as a whole. And while I do that, it's not uncommon for me to read other things like another novel and just pick one story in the morning to read, or read mangas occasionally. But I don't want to rush through this either, because even going through this, like every chapter, it looks like there's a story, and then there's like a lesson with it, which it says stories and lessons for living. So, I mean, like, you know, that shouldn't be a surprise. But without reading too much into it, I think I'm just going to do 1 or 2 chapters a day, which means it's going to take a little longer for this vlog to get out. And it's not because I don't want to focus just on this like I have the others. I want to focus on this more. I want to get more out of it because, like, just from what I've seen opening this book, like, let me actually get to the table of contents. Like humility, perseverance, respect, honor, love. And without reading this, I'm assuming each story falls in line with the lesson. And just seeing random words on the page, there's definitely going to be historical stuff, cultural stuff, and how that ties in. I'm pretty sure that's how this works. And I want to get the most I can out of this. I'm not against reading like 2 a day, maybe 3 depending on like what I'm doing throughout the day, but I don't want to just sit here and just binge all these. I don't do that with short stories normally anyways, unless they're just like super, super short. And there's 12, and this is this is, 205 pages, and then there's like the afterword, which I will read, but so I'm going to try to read 2 of these a day, which, like I said, normally I do 1, but I want to like not take forever to get this vlog out, but I just want to appreciate this more. And I'm not saying I couldn't appreciate the other ones if, reading them faster, like especially like Little Women, as fast as I read them, but that's like a continuous story. Even like the autobiography, it's continuous. And this is like different stuff, and you're supposed to reflect on it. That's supposed to be the point. So I want to take my time and reflect. So I definitely am probably going to read something else while reading along with this. But since there's 12, I was thinking like 2 a day, like 1 early in the day and like 1 maybe before bed. Or not like go to sleep, but you get what I mean though, like later in the day. That way I have time to reflect, but it doesn't take me so long I'm not adding it, 12 days to get through this, right? So I think that's how that's going to go. I'm not sure how I'm going to talk about it. I don't know if I'm just going to add a detailed review at the end of this, because usually with short stories, I tell you what happens, and I don't want to just like give you the whole story, because these are obviously not that long. I don't know about talking about how to talk about the lesson, so I will figure that out. But I'm not going to check in every single day of reading this, because that might be a bit much. I'm not, like I said, I don't know if I'm just going to do a review or if I'm going to check in a couple of times after a few stories. I will figure that out, but I just wanted to tell you my mindset along with this before those clips start, so it makes sense. Maybe I'm rambling too much, but hey, we're here. Okay guys, I know the setup's different. The audio's better than the rest of the vlog. I know my phone audio is not that great, but I kind of didn't care for just like random pop-in vlogs. But I just did a video that's gonna go out after this vlog, and I'm already sitting here. This is the last book in the vlog, and I'm gonna talk about my overall experience, so I figured why not just do it here, even wearing the same dress. So there we go. So as I have mentioned, I was going to take more time on this because I want to get the most out of it. This was definitely a different read than the other ones. There's short stories, lessons, cultural information, historical information. And I was right. Every chapter starts off with a main story that tells you the theme, and then it tells you how it fits in with Lakota like culture or historically. And in a lot of them, all of them had more than one story in it, but some of them were more like historical, some were personal, some were other Lakota stories that fit in. And I was trying to think, how did I want to do this? Because if I talked about every little thing that was mentioned in each chapter, that would take a while. How do I pick some more over others? So I figured just a review at the end of my overall thoughts in detail was the easiest way to go. And I did read 3 stories on 2 of the days, and then the rest were like 2 stories. So instead of doing exactly 1 a day, because I didn't want to take 12 days for each, because it's for each chapter, not for each story, because that would take a lot longer. So the themes of each story chapter that this has is humility, perseverance, respect, honor, love, sacrifice, truth, compassion, bravery, fortitude, generosity, and wisdom. And when you like see them, like they have the Lakota words for that same word next to it. And what's really cool is, I'm going to just go to the first chapter because it's right there. It has like a pronunciation guide next to the Lakota word so you can say it correctly. And also, if you're interested in this and you have Audible, this is on Audible Plus. I didn't realize this till later because I was looking up other books by this author. I have read one other book by him. I did enjoy this a little bit more than the other. I'm not going to try to compare them though because they are definitely different types of books. But yeah, if you have Audible, this is free to read and I would definitely recommend it. And especially if you're wanting to use the pronunciation guide, it'd be nice to just hear the words actually being said other than just typed out. So with the other books, I didn't really take notes unless there was a passage I wanted to read, or if it was very, very minor notes. But with this one, I took like a notes on like every chapter. There are so many pages of notes. I'm not going to read every single note, but I was trying to take, I was trying to get as much as I could out of this. This is not a long book, and I definitely don't recommend you just fly through it because there's a lot to it. I actually think the first story, which is called The Story of No Mossicans, started off so strong. Like, it was based off a man who went and got captured by an enemy, and everybody presumed that he was dead. His wife did not believe it, and she went and rescued him. And they don't like to brag about stuff, but they have to have witnesses and what have you to tell stories. And he wanted to tell the story to some other men in his village because he knew he was going to die soon. And he had other war victories, but apparently if his wife did not save him, none of his other victories would have happened. So he wanted to make sure she got the proper respect for saving his life. And I really thought that was such a strong story to open up with. And the next part, it talks about the way stories are told and what have you in Lakota society, about how they do it they need a witness to the story. And they do talk about victories, but they're supposed to do it in a non-bragging way. And it's cool. Like, I definitely think you should read it. It goes into better detail than what I'm explaining. I think another good story was from chapter 4, The Story of the Snake. It was about 4 hunters who ventured out into the woods and they saw a giant snake, and one of them became unconscious because he fell while they were trying to get away from the snake. And the snake is sort of a spiritual being and talks to him in his subconscious while he's knocked out and says they have to go find a red barn. Well, 2 of the hunters have to stay with the woman and child, and the other 2 have to go with the man as he tries to cross the river. The man dies, and they have to take the wife back to the original village. Apparently, this had been seemed like the guy who died at the red barn, he knew what was going to happen. And apparently if the hunters did not do this exactly as the snake told them, he was going to come back and kill them. So that's a very, very short summary, but all of these are short stories. They're only a few pages long, and I don't want to basically read the whole story to you. And I'm trying not to tell you every single one because I really want people to read this. But those are 2 of the stories. There's also a story about a man having multiple wives and the wife getting over the jealousy of having that wife. And then it talks about what polyamory is in Lakota culture. Like, it's not just something to be seen as frivolous or whatever, which I know that's not what real polyamorous couples or relationships are like. But, that's what media tries to portray. And there's like a story for everything in this. And I think this is something definitely to look into. I know this is rambling all around, but it's hard to describe this in the way I want to describe it without just I want to make sure you read this, and I don't want to spoil everything, because I'm just trying not to. But I did want to read one part of this just to show you something that I really enjoyed. And this was on page 121 if you get this edition of the book. And this is just in the chapter Truth. And this chapter starts off with a trickster story, but this is not going to be from the actual story itself. And all right, I'm just going to go. I'm rambling. The truth is sometimes painful, but without it is only illusion. The truth is the Lakota still walk the face of the earth. The truth is we survived traumatic change and are wiser and stronger because of it. The illusion is that we were defeated by stronger, better, more moral people with more God-given rights than we had. The truth is, we are overwhelmed by numbers, more people with more guns needing more and more of what we had. The illusion is that we are a conquered people. The truth is, we are survivors. We took the worst that our conquerors could throw at us, and we are still standing. The illusion is that we are part of the past, something to be studied, analyzed, measured, dissected, and ultimately judged. The truth is, we are still a viable culture with tradition, customs, values that have stood several tests. Okay, so I wanted to mention that just because you read this does not mean you understand a lot of customs of Native Americans in general. This is a Lakota cultural book with stories. Every tribe is different back then and today. There are definitely not as many tribes today as there were because colonizers wiped them out, but they're all different. They all had different languages. They had different ways they did things, the way they had warriors or the way they did families. They're all different and should not be seen as one mono group. They're definitely different. There's so many different groups and tribes, and this goes for First Nations as well. This goes for the natives that were in the Caribbean and Central and South America. I just want to mention that. So if you're interested in starting to read different stuff by Native Americans, keep in mind that every tribe is different and try to keep that in mind because that's very important. And before I go, I wanted to talk about how there's this one short story that was in Wisdom, and it's not the story that the chapter starts off with, but I loved it so much. So there was about this woman who liked to gossip, and she went to a grandmother and talked about how can she make her life better. And she gossiped a lot, and the grandmother told her to leave a feather at every single house of the person she's talked about. Then she went back, she's like, okay, I did that. And she's like, go grab them back. And she's like, the wind blew them away. And the story is basically about when you start gossiping and just saying something, it spreads out to the wind and you can't just get it back just because you regret it later. And the real consequence about it, and it's very short, it's only a page. It's just, it goes off half one page to the other. And I really like that. Like I said, there's a story for everything. And I love the cultural lessons behind it. And I know I've mentioned this 100 times, but yeah, I definitely recommend reading this. There's a lot to learn from it, culturally and for your life. And it just makes you think about some stuff differently too. Okay guys, so I definitely enjoyed this challenge of the random generator. I don't know if I'll do this again. Maybe I will. I haven't decided. But the 4 books it picked were all very different, and I appreciate that because I don't usually like to marathon very similar books back to back. I like to mix things up a little. And this gave me 4 very different types of books. Even if one's pretty problematic, I enjoyed all of them, and I didn't want to DNF any. All of these were, I got my life lessons, I got my children's book, I got like a sitcom thing, and I got a book about a very important perspective that we need to discuss more. Very two very thought-provoking books. I don't have a favorite between any of these. If there was any that I had to dub what I liked the least, it would be The Secret Garden, just because some of the elements, but I don't think I would read Little Women again not just because of the length, which I don't mind thick books, I don't, but since it's kind of a sitcom-y feel, it's not something I think I would want to like reread. I would reread these two, maybe. I don't know if I will, but I could see myself wanting to come back to these, and I would definitely recommend these over the other two, but they're all good. And yeah, so that is it for this vlog. I don't know what else to say. If you're gonna do anything like this, let me know. If not, if you thought this challenge was stupid, let me know too. Just be friendly about it. We can discuss anything about any of these books, and I will see you later.